The doctor carefully examined Timothy's ear and was surprised at what he saw. This was not something that he had seen before in his career, and was definitely not something that could be fixed with a simple visit to the doctor. Teresa watched in silence, hopeful that the doctor would be able to help her son. However, it quickly became apparent that this would not be the case. The nurse had examined Timothy's ears from the inside and found something that caused her to gasp in surprise. She quickly excused herself and left the room, leaving Teresa and Timothy wondering what could be wrong. Timothy sat staring into space, lost in thought, while Teresa tried to make sense of the situation. The nurse's worried expression did nothing to ease Teresa's nerves as she entered the room again with a doctor in tow. After a quick examination, the doctor placed a hand on the boy's head and began explaining what she had discovered, while her words were reassuring. The gravity of the situation was not lost on Teresa. Teresa was shocked when the doctor told her what was causing Timo's ear problems. She would never have guessed it was a foreign object stuck in his ear. Now she was worried about whether or not Timo would be okay. Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It had started about the time that Timo had turned 9 years old, a few months earlier. When Teresa noticed that he was replying to her with fewer and fewer questions, she started to get worried. At first, she believed he was going through a period in which he would disregard her more. However, this was to no avail. Despite his best efforts, Timothy was never a popular child. He had always favored being alone over interacting with other children at the playground. He grew accustomed to spending extended periods of time in front of the TV, playing video games with a headset covering his ears. By patting him on the shoulder, Teresa could get his attention. Timothy, despite his efforts, had not had the best of beginnings. The primary reason was Teresa's connection to Bjorn, Timo's dad. Though she loved Bjorn, she and he had grown apart long before Timothy was born. Bjorn didn't want to keep Timo because, at the time, he didn't feel emotionally or financially prepared to be a parent. Teresa, however, had always hoped to have children, even if she hadn't planned for them. So she had the baby, having convinced Bjorn that they would be successful parents. But by the time Timo was 2 years old, Bjorn's anger had reached a boiling point. The relationship between Teresa and Bjorn was hopeless by that point. It ended in the couple's divorce. Teresa knew her son had struggled, even though Timo was too young to remember most of it. In light of this, she couldn't hold her son accountable for seeking solace in a medium such as video games as he got older. But this is getting out of hand. There was cause for concern, and she felt it. If Timo's hearing loss was a direct result of his prolonged use of the gaming headset, he had to take it off. Teresa told Timo about her worries and immediately began limiting his gaming time and, more importantly, prohibiting the headset use. To some extent, she hoped it would help. Teresa hoped that now that Timothy wasn't allowed to use the headset, she'd notice a change in his attentiveness. However, this was not the case despite Teresa's watchful eye on the headset. Timo's issues appeared to be getting worse. It was everywhere, and Teresa couldn't help but notice it. It was like Timo had never taken off the headset. Finally, someone else had taken note besides Teresa. Teachers started contacting Teresa to discuss Timothy's worsening behavior in class. There was only one option left for Teresa. She knew it was time to talk to Bjorn. She figured if she explained the situation and asked permission to have Timothy's hearing checked, he would agree. After all these years, she had never once asked him for anything else. She initially ignored Bjorn's calls. The voicemail confirmed that Teresa's ex had kept the same number, even though it was clear you didn't want to talk to her. But Teresa persisted because she knew how important that appointment was for Timothy. After 5 days of unsuccessful calling, Bjorn finally picked up. Even after hearing an angry, "What do you want?" Teresa managed to keep her cool. She needed to pull through. The pain in Timothy's ears was now a frequent complaint. Teresa knew that he required immediate medical attention and that she would need Bjorn's assistance in getting him to a doctor. Bjorn swallowed his ire and gave Teresa a chance to explain herself. Teresa informed him of Timothy's diminishing hearing and growing pain as soon as she could, regarding how going to the doctor suddenly seemed to be the only choice. She explained to Bjorn that she needed to use his insurance to pay for their son's medical care, because she could not afford it herself. Bjorn finally responded. The news that Teresa could use Bjorn's insurance for Timothy's appointment nearly caused her to collapse with joy. To top it all off, she couldn't believe it when Bjorn assured her that he'd cover any medical expenses related to Timo if anything were to happen. Teresa felt relieved and couldn't stop thanking and praising Bjorn. But he brushed that off as well, rationalizing his absence from fatherhood by saying it was the least he could do. Teresa received a phone call the evening before her scheduled visit. She was shocked when she looked at the screen to see who it could be. Yes, that was Bjorn on the line. Sweat beamed down from her brow. Perhaps now, when they needed his help, he'd back out. She answered the phone with trepidation, expecting bad news. On the other hand, Bjorn kept to himself and was even a little shy. Please let me know if you and Timo will need a ride to the doctor on Monday. Suppose you don't mind my asking. Teresa reasoned that taking the bus was their only option because they couldn't find any other transportation options. She was still wary of him despite his generosity. Bjorn was not a generous person, and he had never made an effort to integrate himself into Timo's life. Early the following morning, Teresa and Timo arose to get ready for their scheduled appointment. Teresa had just about given up when the doorbell rang 3 times. She hurried to the door and opened it to find a red-faced Bjorn standing there. The car ride to the doctor's office was expected to be eerily quiet. Bjorn didn't know how to be a father because he had barely known his son. The doctor came in after the nurse had finished examining Timo and introduced himself quickly to the parents. The doctor said he had a full schedule today, and Timo's severe hearing loss was the only reason he could see him so quickly. Bjorn audibly shook at the revelation. The situation didn't seem that dire to him. The doctor noticed that this side of his ear looked very different from the other. He seems to be missing a chunk of his eardrum, and the infection caused by Timothy's repeated stabbings looks quite severe. Bjorn turned away from the group to keep his face hidden. Despite Teresa's best efforts, it appeared that he was feeling ashamed. Teresa stumbled over her speech. So, what does that imply? Just what happened that caused him to lose an earlobe? Please, he's a kid. The doctor continued by saying that Timo couldn't simply lose a piece of his eardrum. There should have been significant damage to the area, and both Timo and Teresa would have noticed if they hadn't already. Teresa was perplexed as to why Bjorn would continue avoiding eye contact with her. Why didn't he recognize that his son had such an odd health problem? Even though this medical condition is relatively rare, it is almost certainly inherited. Teresa was taken aback when she learned this. She had never heard of this problem growing up, and neither had her doctors. She looked over at Bjorn, who was swallowing his shame. The obvious thought on his mind was not this. Oh man. Bjorn mumbled, "I knew that was a possibility," as he looked pitifully at Timo. Ta scowled at Bjorn. He should have told them everything he knew about them by now. Teresa restrained herself from screaming and asked him to explain. After he had gathered up enough nerve, he managed to speak. Bjorn claims that this genetic anomaly runs rampant in his family. Since his dad and uncle had it, Bjorn assumed that Timo wouldn't be at risk of contracting it because he wasn't Bjorn's son or one of his brothers. That, alas, was not the case. Timo's hearing would not have deteriorated as much if the problem had been addressed sooner, the doctor told Bjorn and Teresa. As a result, Teresa experienced a sense of betrayal. Bjorn's only concern was himself. "Bjorn, why didn't you say that?" She sobbed and made an effort to relax. The doctor swallowed hard and gestured for them to talk later when they would have more privacy. The doctor said, "Fortunately, I have good news," trying to brighten the mood. The surgical correction of this condition is feasible, and the patient will recover quickly. Timo will not be absent from class. Even though it was terrible news, this was a welcome development. Timo could handle it, of course. The return trip was as silent as the outbound one, but it wasn't due to tense this time. Before Timo was out of earshot, Teresa had held her wrath in. Teresa told Timo to head to his room as they neared the house, adding that she would follow suit shortly. Timo burst in, and Teresa looked at Bjorn, who was preparing to unleash. She was about to give him the scolding of his life when she saw tears well up in Bjorn's eyes. Before Timo was born, she had never gotten such a reaction from him. Even though she didn't comprehend why he was just now displaying his emotions, she felt a little more receptive. Bjorn broke down in tears, revealing how tough it was for him to accept that he wouldn't be a part of his son's life. There was no real chance for him to start over, because he hadn't been in a stable relationship since Teresa and hadn't fathered any other children. For quite some time, he meant to call them and make amends for their past mistreatment, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Uncharacteristically, Teresa experienced a twinge of compassion for Bjorn. He was as guilty as they come, yet it seemed he had a significant karmic debt to settle first. A short time later, Teresa found herself in a position to forgive Bjorn. The expression of modest relief spread across Bjorn's face as it lit up. They avoided talking to Timo by spending some time together in the car. Bjorn said he would cover the surgery cost in full and check in with his dad to see how the rest of the family was handling the news. He was making an effort to start over with Timo and Teresa. Bjorn picked them back up on the day of Timo's surgery, this time setting multiple alarms in case he forgot. The operation went smoothly, and the surgeon assured Teresa that Timo would probably be able to hear normally again. The idea was so far-fetched that she was almost in disbelief. Finally, Timo's life returned to normal. Bjorn paid many visits to Timo while recovering from surgery, giving the youngster a variety of tiny gifts and sweets. However, no one could have predicted that he intended to remain there permanently. Teresa and Bjorn had called it quits on their relationship, but Teresa knew that Bjorn's relationship with Timo was getting off the ground.